This is always subject to change. I'm Ann Hamilton, and I'm here today with Kristy Edmunds, who's joining us from Los Angeles. A bit of background, besides all the books that you see on the shelf behind Kristy, at an incredibly young age, Kristy founded the Portland Institute for Contemporary Art, and a city much in the news at this moment, and also started a time-based arts festival. And in the process of doing that, she changed the city. And I happen to know at the moment that she departed to become artistic director at the Melbourne Festival. There was a spontaneous, enormous parade that accompanied her leaving the city. So she was artistic director at the Melbourne Festival, and then also a 3-year, I think, acting artistic director or initial artistic director at the Park Avenue Armory, where I was completely spoiled to have worked with Kristy on a project at the end of her tenure there before she left to join UCLA and become executive and artistic director for the Center for the Art of Performance, and to reimagine what it means to bring live arts to a campus community and a diversity of physical spaces and programs. So, Kristy, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be seeing you in the Zoom.
Yeah, me too. So I know that in all of those locations and in all of those roles, you have commissioned artists, you've nurtured new work, you have trusted artists and audiences to take risks. But this series of conversations, I think it's like we're wanting to explore practice and process. And we're at a moment, I think, where we're all looking for lighthouses of how to respond to this place we find ourselves. And I know many people have looked to you for that beam of light. But I want to start kind of going back earlier. Your training as an artist. You are an artist, and you don't happen to make objects at this moment, but you touch the world in multiple other ways. And can you talk about what preparation being an artist has given you to work in this expanded form you now work in? Like what prepares you to respond? You know, where is all of that cultivated inside of you?
It's such a huge question. I mean, I'm not really sure that I have any particular kind of methodology or any particular way of verbalizing what that is, but I can say that, you know, for me, the frameworks of everything that I've ever done is a framework that's grounded in a sense of collaboration. Mm-hmm. And so in this situation, for example, it had nothing, my ability to respond was about take an action, like get on your feet, this is real, move forward. And artists teach you that, and your own artistic practices teach you that. You know, where to from here, in what way, how best to move the pen, how best to, you know, thread the needle, but we proceed. It's not, you don't sit still, you move. Right. And in the movement of taking those acts, even when you don't know that your feet are going to land in sure footing, you're still putting your feet forward. And that is some kind of an inner compass that says, trust in the collaboration that life is going to find your sure footing in some particular kind of way if you continue walking. But to stand still or to freeze becomes more perilous. So for me, it's about reaching to artists and saying, in what way can we stand with each other to find form, to think about something, to make a gentle gesture or a robust gesture, but how best to hold up one another's potential.
Mm-hmm. Well, the central word in everything that you're saying is about the we. Mm-hmm. The collaborative we, who do I need to join with? How do I join? How do we find form?
Well, even when I was a kid, it was like we moved a lot. And so one of the things I was affirmed for was being able to draw well or come up with an imaginary kind of play or something.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that I would forge relationships when moving into a new neighborhood or community or something was, well, do you want to make a project? And so
Yeah.
I realized, oh, do you want to make a project for my whole entire life?
Yeah. That and you've made a lot of projects, but what? Oh my goodness! There's a cardinal sitting right outside my window
Oh,
watching us. Oh,
wow.
very, very red. A female cardinal.
Wow.
Uh,
Of course
so,
you would know that.
well, it's the state bird. So, but you know, this switch from being a kid and asking people, you want to make a project, to starting an arts organization, to now leading and participating in a huge performance
Mm,
arts network of commissioners.
yeah.
To be able to do that, you have to fundamentally trust process.
Yes.
And it seems like one of the forms of your making is how to craft or structure a process within which things can happen. I do happen to know that in 2019, you were recognized by United States artists with the inaugural Beresford Prize.
Yeah.
And that prize was conceived to recognize leadership of what we came to articulate as the condition makers.
Mhm.
And last week we actually spoke with the director, Dina Haggad. And you know, this phrase, being a condition maker,
Yeah.
which is fundamental to crafting process. Can you talk or articulate how you think about that right now?
Mm. Um, it's not entirely dissimilar than how I've thought about it for a long time. And one of them, especially when working with artists who have entrusted you with kind of a flicker of a thought at a certain point, it's a vulnerable possibility of a beginning that doesn't yet have form. And as that starts to expand and have its own energy, I tend to sit there recognizing if I can run ahead on their process so that they can keep evolving it in order to start beating back the icebergs that are sitting out there. So by the time they get to that point, those obstacles have been removed. That's one of the things that I do. I do it in almost every iteration. It's, okay, I have enough of a sense of what is being sought to be conveyed, expressed, but it is not in existence. And in order for it to become something that will be in existence, across all the trials and tribulations and experiments and research and exploration, there's going to be different little traps out there in the future. And I just try to get to those and spring them before, in order to just clear a path for the process to keep moving and elongate as long as that artist will need. And the other thing that I notice a lot is, especially over the past, well, most of my adult life, we have lived at the end of the last century under these acute pressures about success. And most people have become so conditioned around, don't proceed unless you can see that it will succeed.
Yeah.
Right? And success then is a lot of pressure is invested in what this outcome is. And if you move to the outcome, especially artists, if they already know the outcome itself, they don't need to make the work. There's nothing left to learn. There's no journey yet to take. So that outcome pressure or success pressure tends to deaden off these intuitive, the space between the notes. It eliminates them, because each thing being put down is on a march to progress, on a march to success. And so I try to suspend that pressure out of it. I carry a certain amount of it in terms of an institution or an organization as a translator, in a way, how to translate that need for elongated process, iterative ways of knowing, form finding, and then just remove those things that just stunt everything.
Right. Right.
Does that make sense? It's like, and I
Yes,
think we're starting to realize that we cannot be constantly in a pursuit of a kind of ambition that's being defined externally.
right. It's just like we can't continually have answers before we even know if we have the right question.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this importance, I think, of trusting intuition, trusting,
Absolutely.
I think we need to walk over there, or I think the question needs to form this way. And that there's an enormous amount of trust that is involved in creating the spaciousness to welcome and allow that.
Yeah.
And you occupy the position not only as a commissioner collaborator, but also within an institution that has a lot of fiscal responsibilities
Indeed.
that are real and looming and have obviously a lot of factors around them. But so this balance between the I guess I call it the need to know and the
Yeah.
need to not know,
Mm.
and the trust of that, like cultivating that trust. Does that just come from experience of working through so many different projects? Where does that come? Is that just your DNA?
I think it's DNA. I mean, if you kind of flip the script in a way, it's the energy that we will consume and deploy and utilize and draw to not trust, right? Like, I just would rather choose to trust. There's, I mean, what's the problem with trusting?
Yeah.
So I fall forward towards those things. I also, sometimes I'm working as a kind of creative producer or producer alongside of an artist. But more often it's a curator, the care for. The curator is not trying to rig the outcome. They're trying to elevate and make visible the vision the artist has and the why that vision is in place. The why is part of the songline or storyline of what causes an artist to take an uncertain route towards manifesting something and then to give it away to the world to experience and in performance to complete the work in a way. So I can either spend my energy not trusting and therefore apply a rigid set of things that help me eviscerate my fears along the way. Or I can trust the vision of the artist who has their own unique way of addressing anxiety or fear or, joy or, any of it. They know more about what that vision is than I possibly could. So to trust where it's going, how it's going, my process is that everything's exactly where it needs to be when it's there. And the thing that's not supposed to be there, I can help remove.
Yeah, like the roadblocks.
Yeah.
And I think I understand, and I've experienced, obviously, personally, that process with you, both in a installation, big installation, and in theater work. But I'm also thinking about how part of anticipating what is needed is anticipating taking these roadblocks out of the way. And so, can you talk about your work institutionally to help other partnering institutions to actually do that work? Because you may be able to hold that and bring that to your program, but you're also engaged across a huge ecology, really, of other arts organization that have a lot of the same pressures to deliver, to know what it's going to be, to, heaven forbid, maybe it will be bad.
Wow.
Wow. to be good. And so, is the process of bringing people along with you, is that by demonstration? Is that by how do we choose our language? How do we choose our metaphors? How do we give examples? Like, what's effective for bringing people with you? Because I do think in some ways we think of you, you know, as this lighthouse that we want to follow the beam. We want to be in it, the beam
Uh,
with you.
uh,
Is that too big a question?
no, no. It's I I try to do a few things. One of them is the recognition at all times that we are interdependent. None of this happens purely through the sole endeavor. So that interdependence is a form of respect, and to acknowledge, you know, I need you, and this thing or this process needs you in some way, shape, or form. And so I just really, it's the acknowledgement of an interdependence. And to do a collaboration from the basis of interdependence means that I also have to imagine standing in their shoes,
Yeah.
truly standing in their shoes and saying, what will be their pressure points? What will be the thing that makes no happen? What might no look like for them, not for me, but for that person? And how then to find yes. And the yes is, you know, when you stand in the shoes of someone else, metaphorically speaking, but you're really trying to deeply listen, then you can the line of logic will help you find what is the way that helps them fall forward towards yes, or participation, or collaboration. And some people, it can be, you know, their identity or their brand. They don't want to have anything compromising any of the leverage points, or sometimes it's the logo size. Sometimes it's, you know, like a vulnerability that they don't have the right space, and they feel vulnerable to collaborate when they don't have, you know, will that architecture work for this framework, or resources. That's another one. Resources are really, truly profoundly emotional for institutions and for individuals. And so anytime there's unevenness, I look at it and say the big picture is, let's say for a project with an artist, the mobility of that idea and that artist to reach multiple points along a framework. And everything is not the same. So how to create a path where a smaller space that has less resources can participate, and a larger one can participate at a different level, and how we look at one another in a collaborative framework, constantly keeping our eyes on why we're doing it. The why is the mobility of that artist's idea. It's that project's pathway, or, you know, that individual's humanness being present and resourced. And so if you look at it in the whole framework, and every one of us is interdependently part of that, you're weaving a kind of collaborative practice across very uneven terrain, but we all share the same belief. Getting, you know, I think I've said it to you before, but whether you're making a project, or you're collaborating with others, or you're living in a big giant institution and full of bureaucracies and compliance regulations and everything else, the things we learn, it's a process of collecting yes. How do you collect the yes across interdependent frameworks when something doesn't want to participate? Or no is just easier. And you need them to be willing to stretch further than no, just even maybe. And then that's halfway to yes. So I think through all of the different possible points of intersection along the way, and think about how to collect those yeses. And what I think stops projects often is that, you know, somewhere down that path, the thing that says no, there's going to be one thing, and you know, if that entity says no, like you don't get the permit or whatever, that will stop the project.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think people, for the sake of efficiency, another problem of our mental habit, efficiency, you go to the big ask first, because if that says no, you know you don't have to do any of the rest of it. And what I do is I collect the yeses in small ways all the way along. So now there's 12 of us in yes, and take all 12 of us who have said yes to the one big request. And it's harder for them to give you a no. But if you start with the hardest one first, it's an efficiency but you're likely to be thwarted.
Well, and it's that
How's that
you,
for a tactical, listen to my little tactical mind here. Yeah.
well, it sounds actually very similar to, I feel like how I've worked and collaborated with in really different circumstances with a lot of different kinds of institutions is that I think the first thing is to understand what is here, what are all the capacities and the circumstance or conditions, and to pretty quickly, I think you can identify the yes people, but it's because you're asking people to join you
Yes.
and you're asking people to come in, and I think that people do want to join, and I think
Yes.
like in my case I'm always asking for help constantly,
Yeah.
and I think people have all different kinds of expertise and knowledge and they want to help, and
Yeah.
so by gathering that together, it's not that you're necessarily just following your vision, because you're
No.
finding your vision in that conversation with all of those people
Yeah.
that create the landscape that you're working in response to and with.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things you're saying that it brings up is this idea of circulation, and um, especially at this moment, how can work circulate
Yeah.
and be shared, that the impulse for work is to be social, is to
Mm.
touch, is to
Mm.
reach other people.
Mhm.
And Lewis Hyde, who I know we are both huge fans
Huge.
of,
Huge.
huge, and he writes in his first book, The Gift, about the importance of art being let's see, how does he exactly say it? He's the importance of art being made, conceived, consumed in the spirit of a gift, which means that it
Yes.
stays alive because it stays in circulation, and that holding it and preventing it from that circulation is what kills things,
Oh,
which is true also of ideas.
indeed.
So at this moment,
Mm.
when the theaters are dark, many
Yeah.
of them, where we have the back of trucks and we have outdoor space and we have conditions that don't have all of the kind of physical supports that a lot of performing arts have become accustomed to and have needed. How are you thinking about forms for circulation right now?
Well, um, I think there's also an important thing to add into that circulation, which is also resourcing, right?
Yeah.
So in the performing arts, it tends to be that there's a certain amount of contribution that goes towards the manifestation of a choreography or a dance work or a play or a concert, etc. But then it tours, then it starts its circulating, right? And an artist is paid as a performer after they leave the stage, not before. So if you cannot access that stage, or you've had things suspended or canceled, you're living in a kind of economic cash flow coma, which of course doesn't last very long. So the urgency here for me was to immediately shift all of those kinds of contractual processes into commissions and send the money out. So I'm refunding all of the tickets for all the shows, and the institution was hemorrhaging. But the most important part was, don't let some of our most extraordinary creative humanity be left behind while you try and shore up your institutional self. So we moved resources out. And the circulation of these ideas now, obviously, we're all learning how to access the internet in different ways. Artists are finding all kinds of different ways of putting work out there. We as institutions are also creating like digital stages and digital environments. And for me here, again, it's an ethic, but we could take and start streaming our archival performances. But the artist does not earn. It is the least investment.
Mm-hmm.
And for there to be a future, the investment has to flow directly to those artists so that they can sustain themselves over an extremely long dry spell. So for us, it's been doing things where we know each other's stages and theaters are dark, They're opening across the country and the world in different ways. So we've teamed up with filmmakers and camera crews to go into venues, and the artist is able to perform for these cameras, be edited for the sake of a known digital mediated environment. And then we give them the film. So we will stream it to our communities, but they then have the film. And that allows them to replicate their tour so that they can continue to have a presence with the performance spaces that are figuring this out. Some of them have simply postponed, but meaning like we'll start up again in the fall of 2021. And they, there's a continuous, like, well, maybe we'll open in March, and if not, we'll keep postponing. I wasn't able to keep planning the same event over and over. It was, if I moved quickly, we would deploy the resources while these artists were in physical shape, rehearsed, and they could then have another form of circulation. We're doing a thing for artists, relief of, it's called the Sidewalk Sessions Los Angeles, and a person can host a performer at their driveway. We attend on the sidewalk. They can stream it out on their Facebook or whatever and share it that way, but they can't invite their neighborhood. And it's a 10-minute performance. And the artist, somebody has a ticket, we triple the investment because of a gift we had from a philanthropist. And then, they can move around the city. So we're looking at zip codes and creating this entire choreography. The sense of a live being as a gift, distanced from you, but present for you through their craft, is profoundly meaningful to the audiences that can no longer gather.
Well, it's an interesting inversion, because there's been so much effort to bring people to the theater.
Absolutely.
To, certainly in Los Angeles, negotiate the traffic and the timing of getting to a theater.
Yeah.
And so this is the opposite. This is like, how do we bring the work really intimately to you?
Exactly. Exactly. And so, there's the digital kind of stage that we're navigating, which is intense. And then there's how the gift of intimacy. I always think of when artists are performing and we're building audiences for the exchange of that idea, that it's a kind of, it's an expression of love for a stranger. That people spend their entire life rehearsing, practicing, uncertain, non-knowable economies, et cetera, and you're manifesting an idea that you want to give away in order to share it and exchange it, and be reviewed, be critiqued, be judged, all of these things that artists are willing to do. And it is, to me, this profound expression of love for a stranger. And that continues when you show up on somebody's driveway or their sidewalk.
Yeah.
It is literally, I'm here for you.
Right.
And they become the presenter. They become the host. They become, mi casa is su casa, this far away. But there is something profound.
Well, and it's because then you also take responsibility to the relationship. Right, rather than being a maybe more passive consumer of an experience. That there's an activation of that relationship that is then different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've been here. You've heard me, I think, before. But often when I would stand on the stage, I would go out to welcome the audience, and it's a way of also signaling to the performers what the energy in the room is like, because they haven't seen them. They're backstage. And I will say to audiences, we do have a job together this evening, which is to make a memory, because it's only ever going to happen this way once. And audiences are a kind of living archive for the performer's gift on that day, in that time. And it's not about consuming, and it's not about 5 stars, 3 stars. It's about conjoining a cultural practice to forge a cultural memory in time and space, through the extension of an artist into that piece of architecture and community. And the life cycle of that work lives in the context of that individual's memory. And that's another point of circulation. Right. When people were first asking me about theater, what's going to happen. And I would say to audiences, part of what you can do for artists right now is not ask them when they're going to be able to make something new, but to express to them how the work you've experienced that they've already made continues to live in you. Because that makes an artist want to proceed.
Yeah. Well, and I think that because you work in live arts and you work in, it may be documented or it may in some form, but it only lives in the memory and the experience of the people that have actually been there. And it's really impossible to trace or know or quantify in any way what that is, what the circulation is. And so again, it comes back to trust.
Yeah.
I think in one of the articles that, or one of your interviews, you quote Wim Wenders. And it's about something, maybe you can bring it up for me, but about the most political thing that one could do now is to pay attention to where we direct.
Where you direct your eyes.
Your eyes.
Yeah.
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 And so I was thinking about that for you right now, because you're looking at a whole landscape. You're looking at the possibility for artists to participate in the enormous reimagining and remaking this moment has given to us to do. Yeah. This is a time for getting to work. Mm. Can you talk about where your gaze is now? Is that too open a question? Yeah.
No, I mean, and it was Paul Holdengraber who had said that Wim Wenders quote for me when I was doing a podcast for him, but it's really true where you direct your eyes. So in my case, where I'm directing my eyes all over the place, but it's really in trying to find the places of a certain kind of grace that we have been so profoundly and acutely humbled that maybe we can listen differently. Mm. I don't think my eyes are focused on obviously a national, a global strategy, but it's about the way in which artists need to be sitting at every table, every single table, every boardroom, every policy room, every back room deal, school rooms. It's because artists will reimagine a future. They will imagine something differently that prevents us from snapping back to the grid of what we already know, that we implemented, held to, and it has not worked. Right. So how we look at that interdependence and where it's like we need the poets and artists in our lives right now, and we need them in very different ways. It's this kind of deep side of humanity. It's not the painting or the print or the photograph or the sculpture or the song or the dance or the installation. Those are all part of it. But it's how we think and how we learn that becomes useful, not to a continuous pressure to become more resilient, but to become more elongated and live more lightly on the land and find ways to make ambition useful in its purpose for human beings and the natural world and everything else, but not the kind of race to come back to what was, because it's all we understood how to have form around. And therefore artists and poets and thinkers in very different ways will prevent us from reverting to complacencies and reverting to self. These to me are where I'm trying to put my gaze, that helping a public understand the role of the artists and our cultural fabric and infrastructure is not purely monuments to, towers of success. It's a way of being, it's a way of knowing, it's a way of connecting, it's a way of carrying, holding, and forging different ways of finding one another.
Well, and it's this reorganization really of fundamental values.
Completely. So it is a part of our national ecology that we have not looked after well. right? I mean, you can look at some of the surveys of what will be coming down now, and literally there's something in the tune of 12,000 not-for-profit arts organizations that will close by the end of this month, let alone the number of individuals and so on and so forth. But even behind all of that, the energy of people who are now closing their small spaces or, you know, losing their organization due to economic carnage that we're experiencing, or individual artists who have had their own income eviscerated, they're still willing to participate in solutions that are not about the self. The not-for-profits are figuring out, where do we give our archive to strengthen something that might last longer now? There's a constant, how do we not leave our humanness on the table because we're more obsessed with self-gain. It's even in grief and loss and difficulty, how to find generous act that leaves evidence of care. It's why you see artists also putting, you know, work from their archives out or streaming from their kitchens. It's to say, I'm still with you. Maybe I have something that offers you, whoever you might be on the other end of the stream. It's not about how do I throw up a tip jar and start earning, although that's critical. It's the something else. It's the something else that says, in my humanness, in my vulnerability, I still have capacity to put something in motion that might be useful and helpful.
Well, and it's about a very fundamental sense of recognition that is exchanged, right? Yeah. And that recognition of another person in front of you, you know, both literally and metaphorically, is what gives us hope, right? Yeah. And if we lose that, then so much is lost. And so how it's in making, it's in reaching out, it's in connecting that the how of the work in front of us will be found.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, people also, I say people, but a lot of the times that, you know, the kind of general public that's not intimately involved in the arts on a regular basis, they're not as aware of, I mean, artists read voluminous amounts of books. They're listening, they're researching constantly. The knowledge bank, because they're constantly seeking what is going to live, what's going to take root in here and cause me to fire. So they have knowledge about aeronautics and engineering and, you know, like education, curriculum development, body-based practices, I mean, honeybees, the environment, the natural world, all these things. And so the process right now of how artists are drawing on lots of different kinds of knowledge across sectors is also a unifier. When those things stop, because they're, you know, the pursuit of a single line expertise means that single line is what you have to contribute. Artists have many lines. Right. And so they can bring these bodies of knowledge closer to proximity and work on things. Well, and can collectively draw on that to be able to respond to a situation maybe from the left door rather than, you know, what might be apparent. Exactly. And I mean, I've always thought of myself as a kind of generalist. And really? Well, in the sense that everything can possibly be part of the work. Yes. Got it. Right. And a generalist in the sense of not necessarily having depth of knowledge in any one area. And you're looking at me very skeptically. Well, but, I think you're, I understand I understand what you're saying, but you have taught me more than almost any human being with just sharing of different tributaries of how you seek and find, and then you, I mean, things to read, podcasts to listen to. Have you heard about this thing, this poet, this thing, this, I mean, so what I feel is that by you exploring all your tributaries across the estuary of your practice, you share those tributaries and my world expands.
Well, and that's what we all do. That's what you do.
Exactly.
That's what we all do. And I think that we, right now, all of our antenna are out and they're supercharged, right?
Yeah.
Trying to pay attention to what the change, always subject to change.
Yes.
That signal is changing, and bringing collectively one's experience to be able to respond. And I think that this idea of artists being a part of all sorts of processes, from city
Yeah.
planning to
Exactly.
the boardroom to participation in the schools, like like I think um, I think people want to participate, artists want to participate,
Yeah.
and are many are collaborative in nature. So is there any way that you see that being enacted now? I'm thinking about Harold Fletcher and actually going to with
Um,
you to in Portland to the school where as an artist he works,
yes.
and the program of younger artists who worked with him to put on an art fair,
Yeah.
and how unique a model that has been now for a number of years.
Yeah.
But it seems like especially prescient in some ways right now as an example of the what happens when someone makes a commitment to a relationship within a structure that isn't necessarily where you expect to find the artist practice unfolding.
Yeah. I mean, he's masterful at those things, but I agree 100%. I think there's so many different artists that are working, some of them are working in communities very specifically around eradication of a food desert because of a freeway that's gone up. But what I think part of it is that is a kind of organic and germane part of a process. I want to share my process with you, and therefore we will work together. And how do I transfer knowledge to you? How do I gain knowledge from you?
Mm-hmm.
How do we see each other in that space? And it's the same thing. Let's make a project. Let's make a project together. And what kind of project do you want to make? And what role do you want to play? And what do you want to wear? And the whole thing, right?
I think you need to make a t-shirt. Let's make a
Want to make a
project.
project? Um, um, and even here, I mean, that's one of the things that I also, and you as well, we're in, major public research universities.
Mm-hmm.
And that means I can be in proximity with somebody who's, discovering the inner properties of a black hole and say, want to make a project? How might artists intersect with that? What does it look like out there? You can go across these different things, but actually we do end up, if you bring an artist into that room with you, something starts to happen for all involved. And once an artist does make a project that captures enough visible attention, it will change. An urban planner will go, I have to go find that person. Like, who made that possible? Who made that food desert go away, or who figured out that houseless people could start populating abandoned malls
Mm-hmm.
rather than being a headquarters for another thing. Like, let's go there first. Let's try. And that when the effort turns into something that can be seen, it can completely inspire and ignite other kinds of systems that prior to that we could never access,
Right.
or we didn't know how. Some artist shows you how. The how of it is informed by a why, and that visibility causes other systems to seek more.
Mm-hmm. I always think that word "how" it's how is the core of everything, and
Yeah.
and even for the situation of bringing people together across with their various expertise, because I think that sometimes collaboration can be elevated, like, oh, we want to collaborate, and so you invite
Yeah.
people into the room and go like, okay, you're both interesting, or you're all interesting, let's see what happens. But I don't think it's until you actually have a problem that you want to work on together,
Yeah.
that the real collaboration happens.
Yeah.
And so, it feels like in this moment, one of the things is, well, how do we set the table around, obviously we have lots of problems,
Many.
many problems. And so how do we bring people to that table
Yeah.
to configure different hows for
Hmm.
different really particular
Hmm.
local circumstances?
Yeah.
And how are the arts one of those tables
Yes.
for, I guess, yeah, making that table for that to happen.
Yeah. We'll have to do more convenings, I think.
I think so. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
I mean, I do want to return to something you talked about when you talked about the root of the word to curate,
Mm,
which is, I think, to care,
to
to
care.
care for something,
Yeah.
which is to come into relationship with something.
Hmm.
And the acts of making are, I think, in so many ways, acts of care, and they demonstrate care.
Yes. Every time I look at a work of art, doesn't matter what century, it doesn't matter. Sometimes I look at it could, or a performance. What I see, what I actually see beyond before kind of color and the things, the shapes, is the evidence of care. I am the evidence and residue of care.
Mm-hmm.
And if I remember saying it to my mom because she was a functional craft potter. She liked things to have symmetry and the sameness, and she wanted them to be useful. But she knew that I had a much different kind of propensity towards abstraction. So she would take me to like the Walker Art Museum. We lived there in Minneapolis briefly, and I would see, and I could tell she would be looking at things uh, from the vantage point of like, what the hell is that? Like, what is that? Red dot on white canvas with a line. What is that? I would look at it and be like, I can see this is the evidence of care. This is an artist. This is the residue of an ethic of them practicing optimism. They made that, you know,
Yeah.
and I've just always seen that. I guess it's how we try to cultivate audiences into these worlds is that the butting up against something that might shake you by the throat or disrupt your complacency or confront you with unfamiliarity.
Mm-hmm.
Also a way of um, asking you to fall forward
Yeah.
to something that expands. You don't have to like it, but to be expanded by it is to listen to what it provoked in you, and you get to
Yeah.
practice growth as a way of being. If we can just suspend from the shutdown,
Yeah.
and if it's too much, people close their eyes. That's what they do. It's a low risk proposition to have your soul stretched by an art.
Well, and I think right now, when maybe no looms large in a lot of
Yes.
arenas, and where fear looms larger yet, that what is it that allows our hearts to fall open
Mm-hmm.
to be changed or to be uncomfortable or to not be able to sort of know what something is or put it in a category of previously known experience? We're in a moment where everything is different,
Yes.
and that's terrifying in a lot of levels. We can't see yet where we're going, but it's like, I know that if our hearts close, if
Yeah.
we if we can no longer to respond to what is actually happening, then nothing can happen. And so it seems like that the role for the arts is to keep the soil turning
Yeah.
so that we feel that and we see how we can participate. And I think there's so many so many, what I'm hearing from so many people is like, I want to just know, I want to help, I want to do something, I
Mhm.
want to act.
Yes.
And and it's not really clear where or how to respond to that impulse
Yeah.
right now, but it's there and it's very, very strong.
Yes. And you know, especially in, I mean, American democracy is certainly under great strain and duress, certainly more so than I've ever conceived.
Mhm.
And it can be so profoundly overwhelming of like, how does one take an action? And
Yeah.
but the sense of like, did you register to vote? Did you, you know, they're
Mhm.
small acts to take if one can do them, right?
Mhm.
And then there's the other thing. Artists will often do small projects because it's the capacity to carry your studio in your backpack and be light of foot. And so there's like mail art campaigns and small notes and the handmade gesture going. And it's about the post office. It's about
Yeah.
economizing a post office in a particular way, or putting out COVID awareness campaigns rather than using, like Carrie Mae Weems has made this extraordinary COVID awareness campaign for Black and brown bodies in Spanish and English. And, it's not so that she is getting work put into museum collections. It's not the pursuit of fine art photography as art world, um, you know, success margins. It's,
Mhm.
I have a skill with this tool and I am now going to just make these things and hope that they can go out into the world in wheat posts and yard signs and church fans, and it's COVID awareness campaigns. And so it's
Mhm.
those kinds of things where I watch artists flip the script from an art world uh, place into a public domain in small gestures, and it inspires people to do something. Literally, I can put that yard sign of,
Right.
wear a mask in my front yard. You showed me how to do that, and I know how, and I can do those things. And so it
Mhm.
is, how do we take agency as people
Mhm.
across all of these different spectrums to remind each other that we do have capacity in small acts conjoined in our interdependence towards the largest act of all.
Mhm.
You know,
How do we participate? Yeah.
yeah,
Because how do we participate and take responsibility for the world that we're
yeah,
making? Yeah.
yeah. I've been I've been just doing this thing just where I'm working on a new set of fortune cookie fortunes. I'm just writing, what would be the fortune that if that person over there could open that and go, oh, I feel so much better right now. I'm just doing them. Instead of writing a journal, I'm writing fortune cookie slips.
Yeah. Yeah. I want one of those fortune cookies in
I
my pocket. Uh,
rest assured.
Maybe just to close, Kristy, you
Yeah.
could talk about the current project that UCLA is involved with, the artist Constant Hockaday,
Oh,
and um, and
yeah.
something I'm obviously also
Yes.
involved in. But in terms of this moment that we're in, moving up towards the November election,
Yeah.
where
So,
public space is very tense,
oh yeah,
and Constance's structure of address to this moment that's very much outside the norm of
exactly.
forums.
Well, so Constance was in residence with us last year, and she's a visual artist, makes large scale kind of social sculptures, and she tends to do things like repurposing old, um, boat flotillas and making like an art hotel. She works in large frameworks like you. Uh, she had this idea of really, when we're wounded by public oratory that is in high rotation, that is base or cruel or hyper manipulative, it jangles our nerves, and we naturally start to um, accustomize it so that it doesn't keep hurting. And she was thinking about, how do we find other forms of public address And so she was interested in FDR's fireside chats. So we commissioned her to do exactly what she would do, turn and commission 50 other artists around the country from very different disciplines and cultural realities, younger, older, et cetera, all race, all creeds, the whole bit. And each one basically is taking on their form of addressing the nation from their own vantage point. And how do you do that? Like, how do you address a nation in this time? So it's a 21st, it's a, the current contemporary model of a fireside chat where FDR used the radio. He was coming off of Hoover, Hoovervilles and the Depression and everything else. And he used the tool of that technology in order to reach into a more intimate place of a public, to ask them to have faith and fall forward towards the democracy that had so profoundly let so many of them down. And I think for her, it is about not more rant, not more expression of rage, not to manipulate an outcome, but to give voice from artistic populations and cultural realities, how to be an artist in president and try to find form to address the nation and inspire us to continue with working on the project of our democracy in some particular kind of way, or to give voice to that which is broken, or to use a dying language from your native tribe to share what you can with the nation. It's another way of expressing love of a stranger. So we would have, of course, had many of these performed live or stood live and, that kind of thing. But instead, it's a podcast and a website, and these forms of public address are just extraordinary. They can go from a lament to a high level, sublime expression of optimism, like the ethic of optimism to keep trying with this democracy. And of course, a few rants and a few other things too. But for us, we did a number of things right away where I could commission an artist. I needed to rapidly convert any small amount of resources that we had and move it into commissions, and artists would then help other artists. So her project, I knew, would affect 50 other artists, economically and otherwise. We've done it with choreographers and a scores project and composers doing notes on napkins that we will edition. And, so it's these kind of chain letters where right now I'm working with about 500 different artists in tiny gesture, not in, but not like, let's work on the big masterpiece. It's let's work on the small places where the river still has water running.
Yes, because it's almost like full circle where we started, because it's one step at a time and it's staying in motion. Yeah.
And it's that same exact thing. Let's make a project. Let's make a project that doesn't ask too much from anyone, within the capacity of what we have to give, so that we knit each other back together again.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kristy, so much for joining us.
Thank you.